All right, so what am I doing here with a deck list of redemption cards with 50 Magi in them? What's going on here? Well, I'm up to some coding, and I decided to code an answer to a question that I have. If the card Matthew attacks me, how many cards on average will this little fellow draw? So here's a hypothetical situation. I have a deck full of 50 Magi, and then my opponent's going first, and they're attacking me. Converts to Meek. How many cards is he going to draw? Well, for this really simple scenario, he's obviously only going to draw one card because I have 8 cards in my hand. They're all Magi's, and Magi only has one brigade. So that question's easy enough, and you can imagine a deck with 50 Gabriels. The answer will be 2. If the opponent attacks me with Matthew and counts how many brigades are in my hand, there's going to be 2 brigades. But the question really starts to become complex as soon as any sort of variance happens with the number of cards, the number of different brigades on the cards. And so you end up with decks like this, and it's not obviously clear about how many brigades Matthew's going to draw. You know, he can draw, if you have this guy in your hand, he's going to draw 2, but you're not always going to have him. And so it just really becomes hard to account for the randomness, and sometimes if maybe if you're playing a card like John, who has 3 brigades, or you're playing a card like Good Seed that has 4 brigades, or if you're playing a card like Foreign Wives, they have many evil brigades. There's let's see how many. I think there's 7 evil brigades. So if they see a Foreign Wives in your hand, while while you're running it in the main deck, they're gonna get to draw 7 cards. And like, what if you have the Crowd's Lost sold down and they don't have an answer to it? How many cards are they going to be able to draw from Matthew if your hand's protected? The answer is 0. But how often are you going to get this Crowd's Lost? So it becomes really complicated, almost impossible to theorize. But that's where the lovely power of coding comes in. So what I can do is I can take this deck, shuffle it up, draw 8 cards, and then have a program count the number of brigades in my hand. I can do this over and over and over again. So that's exactly what I've done. So here we are. Let's go back to our Magi deck. I'm going to copy this. It's going to copy the text file. I'm going to go into my program here, put it down in my deck list file, and run my program. And at the output down there, you can see it drew, let's see, make it a little bit bigger for you guys to see down there. The average number of cards Matthew drew in 100 simulations of this deck was 1. So that makes sense. We're just sanity checking. We're just going up by different levels. Let's go to level 2. Copy our Gabriel deck. We gotta walk before we can run. We gotta run before we can fly. As we expect, we see the number of cards Matthew drew there is 2. What about the Noah deck? How many brigades would Matthew hit here? So if you have a Noah in your hand, Matthew's attacking you, you know, we don't want to count blue, green, and multi. We want to just count multi because blue and green are subcategories of multi. So there's going to, if we see a Noah in hand, that's going to be 9, I think. So let's just copy and sanity check this. Yep, that's 9. And lastly, but not leastly, let's get the Foreign Wives deck and make sure the output of this is 7. Paste that in there. Boom, 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 boom. All right, I'm gonna do something crazy. What if we had a deck with 50 nodes and 50 Foreign Wives? So maybe I'm gonna run the simulation, and maybe you guys get to see what we get to start doing. So about 50% of the time, you're gonna have 4 Foreign Wives and 4 Noahs in your hand, and he's gonna reveal your hand, and he's going to get to draw 15 cards. So the lowest we can draw if in a deck full of these cards is 7 cards off of a Matthew hit, and the maximum is 15. So we should expect a number between 7 and 15 here when you run the simulation. Oh, 16, I'm sorry. So that number of simulations there, let's crank that up a little bit. Crank that up to about 1,000,000. The more simulations we do, the more confident we can become that our result is actually the statistically correct result. So, but the trade-off is the more simulations I do, the longer it's going to take. So let me just wait here for you guys. And so almost 99% of the time, they're going to be drawing 16 cards, but there's that one, uh, one out of every, who knows, games that their hand is all Foreign Wives and they'll draw 7. So that's why the number isn't completely 16. Most of the time, in their hand, they have at least one Noah and one Foreign Wives. Okay. Anyways, so moving on, let's apply this to some real world decks. All right, so Augur the Wise and I have been looking at this deck. It looks really cool. And he was curious to see how many brigades or how many cards Matthew would draw if fighting this deck. Because it does play quite a few different brigades here. Judah, Jacob, Peace, it's just very curious. And then it also is playing crowds. So I've also factored in some logic to deal with crowds. So let's go back to our code. Then add the crowds parameter. Go back to our deck list, copy, and paste. So even though it has all these extra cards in the reserve and tokens, it's not really going to account for them in the simulation because the simulation is only checking opening hand, and none of these cards are in the opening hand at the beginning of the game. And then let's run this guy. We'll just do it at a reasonable 1,000 simulations, but if I really wanted to know, I'd crank that number up. But maybe, why not? It's only my time we're wasting. So on average, the number of cards that Matthew drew when looking at 8 random cards from the opponent's deck was 5.26. And that's accounting for the crowd's lost soul. So imagine if you're going second and you draw your lost souls and one of them is crowds, you put it into play, and opponent in theory doesn't have an answer to Matthew or doesn't have an answer to the crowd's lost soul. If they attack with Matthew, they're not going to be able to draw any cards. So just to verify that this is kind of makes sense, this number makes sense, we see 5.26 down there. Let's take this out. Let's run it again. We should expect now this number to be much higher because now that our hand isn't going to be protected some of the time. So yeah, as we saw, the number jumped by about a card and 1.2 cards. So that's cool. And here's some insight we can see. Adding Crowd's Lost Soul to our deck, that decreases the average number of cards opposing Matthew draws by 1.2 approximately. That's just for this deck, so it'd be interesting to see how this number changes for other decks. All right, I'm going to go to my deck, the tried and true Nativity Herods, because I am super curious to see. So this is the deck I'm getting ready for Nationals, most likely. And a big concern is if I go second and the opponent has a Matthew. If they draw 5 or 6 cards, I feel like I'm just out of the game. So I've been really trying to keep my brigades low. That's why I cut Good Seed from the main deck. But, I want to see what the statistical impact of cutting the Good Seed and then adding it back in would be. So here's my deck list. I'm just going to copy it and put it into the program here. Now I'm not playing the Crowd's Lost Soul. So on average, the number of cards Matthew will draw against this deck is around 5.7. It's pretty high, I feel like. And let's see, if we add the Good Seed back into the main deck and we cut, let's see, what did I cut for Good Seed? Let's see, let's put maybe I'll just cut Moses, just randomly, cut Moses. All right, now let's copy this deck and put it back in the program, run the simulation. So we should expect the number of cards to go up a little bit. Yeah, so the Good Seed is increasing the number of cards they're drawing by about 0.3. Very interesting. Very interesting. So another thing I was thinking about was like, okay, all right, let's take Good Seed out. But I was thinking about another evil character for my deck. Let's see, I don't know if I'm 100% happy with Outsiders. I know this card can be really good, but this deck gets on board really fast and doesn't really get behind on Lost Souls or on board advantage. Sorry, my words are mixed up today. And so yeah, I've just been looking at a card that can just have better blocks, and Foreign Wives is a really good card. So let me just try and see what would happen. I do like Foreign Wives, but the reason I don't want to add it is because how weak she is to Matthew. So let me add Foreign Wives, and then let me cut Outsiders, and then let me run it again. So what's our baseline? It's around, mm, look at all these numbers. It's hard to remember which one is which. But basically, so this is adding the Good Seed. That's up to 6.8. This was the baseline. Okay. And then this is the one with Foreign Wives in 6.65. So that's our highest one yet, which is to be expected. So if I just have this and add a Foreign Wives in, that's gonna almost increase the number of cards they draw on average by 1 whole card. Okay, very interesting. All right. And so what if we went back to the deck, cut foreign wives, put outsiders back in, and then added the crowd's lost soul. This is one of the lost souls I'm thinking about cutting. I wanted to try out Covet, and Covet requires LT soul unity, so I cut it just to test it out. But I put crowds back in there. Let's save the deck. Let's copy it. Let's paste it. Let's run the simulation. And crowds is obviously helping a lot. No foreign wives, that's dropping it. And then, so we're going from the baseline of about 5.7. Is that right? 5.7 to 4.56. So yeah, big drop. So here's a caveat. I know that Matthew players, they will have answers to the crowds also. You know, there's a chance that they're going to have woes in their in their opening hand. So if they have the 3 woes, they can just negate the crowds and then attack with Matthew. Or if they have a negate neutral, you know, that's possible too. They're playing Akeem the compiler. But just in a vacuum, it's interesting to see the decrease on average about how to get, if you wanted to really try and get crowds out. So something I would also be wanting to test, what if you were a deck that really wanted to get crowds out always? Well, there's the escape lost soul, which can exchange itself with the NT lost soul in deck. So if you draw this lost soul in your opening hand, you can go get crowds with that one. Or let's say you had a lost child found, you could use lost child found to play a crowds from your deck. So this simulation is not accounting for star abilities like this, the lost child found or the escape lost soul, but that would be another addition to add for the deck. And what I'll be doing is I'll be taking a look at all the decks that are doing well, and I'll be running them through my program, and I'll just be observing what the quote unquote acceptable number of cards that they think Matthew should be drawing, and maybe trying to tweak my deck so that it falls within their limits of what's doing well. So if a deck, let's say on average, allows Matthew to draw 5 cards, then I'll try to adjust the way my deck works so that Matthew decks can only draw 5 or less cards. That makes sense. So I don't know, it's something to think about, something to be excited about. But I wanted to say the last part of this video is for those who wanted to run this program for themselves on their own computer, on their own deck lists. So it is compatible with Lackey deck lists. Made sure of that. So step 1, get whatever deck list you have, click this copy button right there. That'll copy up the text. Step 2, you need to go to, let's see, my GitHub. It's where all my code is. View on GitHub. So I have the whole repository here that you can download. Boom, boom, boom. And then I'll have a README that tells you exactly the steps you need to do to set up the virtual environment to run the Python code. And then you can just you just type in just run spectrograph. Oh yeah, sorry. You need to paste your deck list in a text file, and then specify the path to that text file here, and specify the number of simulations. I'm going to save this, I'm going to run that, and it's going to run the program for you locally. The only other thing you might need to change is there's a Python file that contains a path to the card data.txt. This is what I'm using to count the number of brigades. So I have this pointing to my max. So this is the applications. I've installed Lackey. I've installed the plugin, redemption plugin, and all the data of all the redemption cards lives in a file called carddata.txt. And so I pointed this program to look at that file to do the searching. And that's how I'm able to map whatever you're putting into here into what its brigades are. So if you're on Windows, you might need to change this, but just change this to wherever that carddata.txt file lives on your computer. But I'll mention that in the README too. All right, so in summary, what you need to do is go download the code, run the install dependencies config script, copy and paste one of your Lackey deck lists as a text file into this decks folder, and then run the spectrograph function. Make sure to point to your deck file, and also make sure this deck list path is pointing to wherever that card data.txt is. So that's how you can use it for yourself. But if that's all too complicated for you, I'm happy to run the program for you. Send me a message on Discord, send me your deck list, and I can send you the average number of cards Matthew would draw against that deck list. And if you do that too many times, if you ask me too many times, I will try to point you to how to do this for yourself, but I don't mind it doing a couple times for y'all. All right, that's the video. Thanks for watching. This is one of the more technical ones, but I feel like it's a very interesting one nonetheless. All right, goodbye.